again. I think this is my third bootcamp in the Power community. I started with Power Ops portal, then the Dataverse, and this is the third one. So thanks again. So can you see my screen? If you could confirm, please.
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. So as Raj mentioned, my topic for this session is Azure Service Bus integration with Dynamics 365 customer engagement, or you can call it as a Dataverse. And I will demonstrate how can you use multiple technique to post message to Azure Service Bus depending on your use cases. And and we'll also see how to automate the service endpoint connection using Azure DevOps. Uh, and as part of my demo scenarios, I'm using one of the preview feature recently been released by Microsoft, which is Azure Key Vault integration with Dataverse. And I think I should able to run that through as well as part of the demo. So my primary focus of this presentation is on the Dataverse side with integration with Azure services. So quick introduction about myself. My name is Satya Kar. I work at Capgemini UK as a senior software engineer, and I have 12 plus years of working experience in Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. I'm a Microsoft certified professional, and in the recent time, I'm also working a lot with Azure DevOps side of it, with automation, automating the Power Platform solutions. My social media handles are on the screen. You can connect me on LinkedIn. I'm most active on, and also Twitter. I have a handle there. Okay, so the agenda for today's session is we'll have a overview between Azure Service Bus and the Dataverse integration. And so yeah, just to set the context, we will have a quick overview on that. Then after that, we'll have service endpoint contracts. We'll see the supported contracts for the Dataverse. And next to that, I have identified 3 to 4 different scenarios for the integration, which will cover the service endpoint AR plugin, which you can call it as a out of box plugin. Then next would be the custom Azure AR plugin. And finally, we'll also have a custom plugin. So the custom plugin is mainly to post message, custom message, custom payload into Azure Service Bus instead of using the service endpoint. And also finally we'll have Azure Service Endpoint Update automation using Azure DevOps. So let's get started then. So the Dataverse integration and the Azure Service was. When considering the integration mechanism, you have few available options with Dataverse. It's important that you consider various elements when choosing a given method. And considering using Azure Service Bus, it's a high scale asynchronous processing. Queuing is a requirement for that. And multiple subscribers might be needed to consume a given Dataverse event, and you want to govern your integration architecture in a centralized location. There are various ways of to communicate the integrate Dataverse with Azure. I'm not going to compare kind of things between Azure Service Bus or webhook or any other techniques, or nowadays with Power Automate also you can communicate to Azure Service Bus, you can consume, but I'm not going to compare any of these Azure services. Instead, my focus would be on the Azure Service Bus, how we can consume and how easily Dataverse can communicate to that. So the Dataverse support the native integration with Azure Service Bus. You can register a plugins with Dataverse that can pass the execution context to one or more Azure solution in the cloud. It is a supported solution for communicating the runtime context obtained in the plugin to an external application. The BOS provider, the BOS provides a secure communication channel for Dataverse runtime data to send to the external application. And for the authentication between the Dataverse and the Azure, the shared access signature is used to authenticate and authorize access to the BOS resources. And the Dataverse platform supports only the outbound integration with Azure. Means there are ways that you can use inbound. Means if the messages are coming to Azure Service Bus queues and topic, So still there is a ways you can consume those and bring into Dataverse, but uh, out of box in a native way, it supports only the outbound integration. It can send message to Azure Service Bus using the event framework, as I said, and also displayed in the screen here. So the architecture, how it works is user perform an action in Dataverse, and that triggers the registered plugin and post message into the Azure Service Bus through an asynchronous service job. So whenever anything happening, when user is taking any action, if there is a plugin registered, the main thing it creates is a system job, asynchronous system job, and that communicates with the Azure Service Bus. As part of the demo, we'll see maybe some of the failure scenario, how you can track them through. And finally, when the message goes to the Azure Service Bus, there would be obviously a listener. The listener can either subscribe to the Azure Service Bus, or they can pull the message in order to process the messages. So now we'll look into the service endpoint contract, the supported service and endpoint contracts from Dataverse. As displayed in the screen, there are few contracts which are uh, out of box supported way that Dataverse plugin can send their execution context message. And the queue contract is basically it's provide a message queue in the cloud, and Dynamics 365 or Dataverse can post message using the service endpoint configuration. And in this queue, the listener doesn't have to be actively listening to a message. It just send the message and forget about it. Um, and topic is similar to exactly the queue, except there is one or more listener can subscribe to receive the message from the topic. So that is the main difference between the queue and topic. To be honest, I think mostly I have used the queue and topic. The other contract I have not that much used, but I'll just give you a kind of a quick, one-liner for each of them. So the one-way contract is basically a contract requires an active listener always. If there is no active listener on the endpoint side, in the service endpoint side, then the post to the service bus will fail. And the two-way one is similar to again the one-way contract, except there will be written from the two-way your contract. A string value can be returned from the listener, from the plugin or from the workflow activity wherever the message posting has been initiated. And REST contract is again similar to the two-way contract on a REST endpoint. And finally, the event hub, which is outside of, I think, the Azure Service Bus. And this is mainly applies to it's a big data streaming platform where there are multiple events, and so it can receive and process millions of event each seconds. Uh, Again, I have no experience with the event hub, and as part of this today's demo, I'll be mainly covering both queues and topics. We'll see some of the use case and run through the system. So the communication, how it works, the queue is often used for point-to-point communication. Messages are sent and stored until the receiving application is available to receive and process them. And the topic is, as I said, it is useful for the publishing and subscribing scenarios. It works like a queue, but it allows each subscription to see only messages that match filter specific criteria. So if in this diagram there are three receiver, and if there are three subscription has been set up with a different filter criteria, there is even if the message goes to the topic, but whatever filter criteria match, that receiver would able to consume that message. So we'll see that in a demo. Right, so now I think we'll go straight into the demo scenario. The first demo scenario is we are going to run out of box integration between Dataverse and the Azure Service Bus. And I'll take the example of topic in this scenario, and we'll create some subscription with filter, and we'll set up that endpoint in Dataverse, and we'll try to post the message into from Dataverse to a topic. So I'll move on to the Dataverse side and the Azure side. Give me a second. Right. So let's first create a topic and how we can implement the filter uh, and with multiple subscription. So I have a resource group here. We'll create a topic first. Sorry, I need to go to my boss. Created a boss before, so I don't need to create another one. So in order to create a new service boss, it is the simple. You give a namespace, unique namespace, then it will start creating. So my boss is already exist, which has a namespace. I'm going to create a topic underneath. As a demo topic, I'll keep everything as a default. So once the topic is created, the next one is we have to create a SaaS key. So generally at the Azure Service Bus level, by default, the system will create the root access, shared access policies, but it is suggested that you should not use the root one if there is really no need, because by default it would have the manage, send and listen as a privileges. Uh, so to limit your access, because from Dataverse it only support the outbound. That means we need a access key with the send access. Only it should able to send it. So we'll create another one. Shared access policies here. Call it as a so if I manage, then it can listen the message from the topic and it could also send. But as we are going to use this from Dataverse can do only outbound. So I'm only selecting the send here. So once the SaaS key is created, it will give us the primary key, secondary key, as well as it would have the endpoint connection, the primary endpoint connection and the secondary endpoint connection. And in order to establish this integration with Dataverse, we can take the primary connection string. And the only option for now is to use the plugin registration tool. So I have already connected to one of my Dataverse instance, which is P Dev. So let us set up the service endpoint here. So you can go to the register menu and register new service endpoint, and you can put the connection string. So it automatically fills most of the details, but the destination type is default is queue. We created as a topic here. So let's do this as a topic. This okay, and the message format, let's go with the JSON format. It's easy to, it's readable. I like the JSON one, and the SaaS key is already been put it in the SaaS key field. So now register this. Okay, so we have a topic created and we registered that in Dataverse by a plugin registration tool. But as I said, if I'll register any of the steps, let's say we are going with contact create or contact update. And if I'll register any steps for this particular endpoint, anytime I create a contact or I update a contact, it is going to send that to topic. But if a scenario that that if there are multiple receiver and based on the filter criteria they want to receive the messages. So in order to do that, let's create some subscription here under the topic. So let's, our use case is whenever the contact is created, it goes into this particular subscription. So I would name it as a maybe create messages and maximum delivery count is 10. So created the subscription. And go inside this subscription. So now we have a filter here. Okay, either you can delete this filter and add a new, or you can directly modify this one. No, just click add filter. It's not allowed. Say the command I'm putting here is this filter, that whenever any message is coming, if the entity logical name is contact, which is for our contact entity, and if the request name is create, then it basically goes into this particular subscription. So I'll save this. Subscription is saved. Now let's create another subscription for the update. So under the update message, let's update the filter now. Instead of create, let's change the request name to update. Okay, so the topics are set up with filters. Now what we are going to do is we are going to register few steps for this service endpoint. So registered a new step. Let's say create, and it is contact. And yeah, another thing is the service endpoint doesn't support the synchronous. It only supports asynchronous. Now, after putting the message in the primary entity, if you try to register here, it will complain. So always it have to be asynchronous. So register this new step. Let's register another step for the update. Uh, Contact. And instead of all attribute, let's just do maybe one of the field, maybe mobile phone or something like that. Let's go with mobile phone. So whenever mobile phone is updated, it should send a message to the this particular topic. Okay, asynchronous. Okay, so we have create step and we have update step. And before we take any action, as I was mentioning, it will create some system job. Okay, it will be good idea. Let me uncheck this one, because for successful run, it is going to delete this asynchronous operation. I think if we can, for this demo, if we can just untick, we can see those system job when it complete. we are all set. So let's go to the, so this is my Dataverse environment. So let's create a new contact. Okay, so let's save this. Let's wait for the system job to be created. So very fast time it is going to be, yeah, it's already started. I think very fast time it bit slow, but once you post a single message, the subsequent messages are going to be very fast. Uh, okay, so as you see, it's already succeeded now. As we have unticked, still we can see the job. But if uh, the tick box is there, then the system job will automatically get deleted after it submitted the message. So now let's look into the topic. So we are expecting a message. See here on the create message. Now we have one message. And just to prove that it is the same message or not. Okay, I'll read the message later. Let's do the update step now. And I'll go to another contact and update the mobile phone as we set that as a filter attribute in the plugin step. It's not yet started. This is a business phone. Okay, let's that's why. Let's do this mobile phone. Save again. Yeah, so it triggered now and it succeeded now. So let's go to the topic. See, we have a single topic, but there are two different subscription. When we created the new contact, it come under the create message subscription. And when we updated existing contact, it come under the update message. So let's look into the exact message. We can go to the Service Bus Explorer. Uh, let's do the receive. Yeah, I don't want to keep it. If you'll go pick, then it will still, you know, you can view the message, but it will still be there in the topic. But let's receive it. So receive is going to read the message and delete. Put this in a and see if that is the demo contact one. Yeah, this is the full name. This is the one we posted as part of the create. So let's confirm the update one as well. So already we read the create message. So that has gone to 0. And under the update message, still we have one message. And we have updated a contact is Forest John. Okay, so let's receive this again. here you go. We updated 1 2 3 4 5, and this get triggered and updated. So this was the first scenario for the demo scenario one, where you can create a topic, you can create multiple subscription, and for each subscription, you can implement your listener. Either it can be a logic app or it can be a function app, and they can subscribe to the subscription level topic and read the appropriate message, even if it goes from a single entity, but there is a filter being added. Okay, so let's go into the slide again for the demo scenario 2. So in the demo scenario 2, now let's say we have a requirement in the first scenario. What we have seen is, as soon as we initiate the trigger, user initiate a trigger, it posts the message into Azure Service Bus, either topic or queue, whatever is registered. But let's say you have a requirement for conditional posting. For a record, if it reach into a specific status or a specific criteria match, then you want to post the message. You don't want to post the message always, because maybe the third party system or who is going to consume and process the message, they only process the message if your record is in a specific state. Okay. So let's create another demo here. uh, I'll pick maybe account entity, and for this, to make it faster, already I have created a Azure AI plugin. I'll run through the code. I'll explain the filter criteria, what I have been set up, and let's see how it works. So just to clarify, the scenario is, we'll take an example of, let's say, account entity, and any account entity has a website URL. Then let's post that message into the Azure Boss. Otherwise, let's keep it. So first thing, let's look into the plugin registration tool. As I was saying, I have a custom plugin for that, Azure AI plugin, and okay, let me show you the code first. So I have an Azure AI plugin. So instead of using the out of box, instead of registering any steps in the service endpoint, I'm going to register a custom plugin, but which will still use the service endpoint. And for this scenario, instead of topic, we are going to use a queue. And for that, I have another service endpoint registered here. So if you'll see, this service endpoint is pointing to a queue, and the queue name is dev account. Okay. And if you look into the Azure side, so we have two queues. One is dev account and a test, and the dev database environment is pointing to this particular queue. Yeah, and if you see, there is no currently steps been registered. Instead, we are going to register a custom Azure Ever plugin, but internally it is going to use this endpoint ID. Okay, so this is the plugin for that. So it checks the context. It checks the context. Then the main logic has been here. As I said, I've taken a simple example for the this particular demo, that it has a target entity, and also it has an image, just to verify the website URL. The record has a website URL or not, and it decide either from the image or from the context itself. And if it doesn't find any kind of URL, then it returns, it doesn't post. But if it finds a URL, means website URL for the account you are updating, then it creates a notification service. Notification service is nothing but it's a service endpoint notification service, and that object is been created from the service provider. Service provider get service, which creates an object of service endpoint notification service. And all we have to do is we have to call that object dot execute, and where we have to use the service endpoint ID. This is the GUID of the service endpoint, which is registered in the environment. So that ID and the context, whatever we are receiving as part of the execute method, we can pass into this method. Okay, so let's see this in action. And before that, already I'll show you my custom plugin, which is already been registered here, which is Power Learn Code plugins. And in that, we are looking into the example one. So let's enable it. So the step is enabled. Let me show you the step. It has been registered on the update of the account, and the filter attribute is name. So means whenever the name is been updated, this particular step is going to trigger. And also I have an image registered here because I have to check either the website URL was previously there for the record, or as part of the context update, the URL has been given. And it accordingly it calculates either the record has a URL or not. This is just example. As I said, the main intention is post the message with a appropriate condition if it match. Okay, so this has been now activated. It's all good. Let's go into the Dataverse and update a existing account. So I'll go ahead again. Okay, let's pick anyone. This one. Yeah, so it has a website URL, so this should post the message. We'll test both, and I'll just append update the name, account name. I'll put as a demo, and I'll save it. Let's look into the system jobs. Yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention that the plugin code is using the same service endpoint ID, and this is using the ID. But where do I store the ID? Okay, if you look into the constructor, this ID has been passed as a config. That means to supply the service endpoint ID to the plugin, I have passed this in the plugin steps here as an unsecure config. And if you store this unsecure config, and service endpoint is a solution component, and when you move this into your test prod, the ID is going to remain same, and the unsecure configuration is also going to be taken care. So these parameters is going to pass into the plugin. Okay, let's see into the Azure that it has reached the message or not. Yeah, so there is a message. Let's check the right message is there or not. So I'll do another receive. Check it here. Yeah, adventure works demo. Yeah. So we have seen this is a second example that if you have any conditional posting, you can create basically a plugin, a normal plugin, but you can use the registered service endpoint in order to post the message when your criteria get satisfied. Now moving into the next demo scenario, which is based on basically this. Uh, Let me go into the presentation. So for the demo scenario 3, first of all, let's understand what was the difficulties with scenario 1 and 2. For Dynamics 365 for Dataverse, no, there is no kind of a difficulties. It just posts the message. But for the listener who is consuming the message, subscribing and reading the message, if the consumer is a .NET based listener, if there is Azure function, then maybe it can use the remote execution context class in order to process the message. But if you have a non.NET type listener, maybe a Java or maybe a FinOps or even Logic app, if you're implementing as a listener, then it must pass the complex JSON or XML, depending on what type of data format you are sending to Azure Service Bus. So it needs a complex parsing, right? So in order to simplify that, is there a way that we could send a custom payload instead of sending the big JSON XML, what we have seen here? So this was the original message get posted from Dataverse into the Azure Service Bus whenever the user trigger the action. But is there a way that we could send a custom message? Yes, basically we can send, but we have to write a custom plugin for that. And in order to write that custom plugin, it is not going to use the service endpoint, which is this one. Instead, um, because if you have seen the earlier example in the plugin, this particular execute method doesn't have kind of any options available where we can pass a custom message. It is always going to be a context, which is of type I plugin execution context, and it been considered as a remote execution context. But if we have to pass a custom payload, then how we can do this? And the difficulties with that is mainly the details about the endpoint, because every endpoint has a endpoint URL, as well as it has a SAS key and the secret where it gets stored, and various other information which are required to authenticate, right? Because SAS key is used to authenticate between Dataverse and your Azure Service Bus. So in this scenario 3, we'll see we can again I have written a kind of another plugin where we can see how we can post a custom payload into Azure Service Bus. Okay, so let me first disable these plugin steps which are registered in the Azure example 1, so that we can test the scenario 2. It is registering. Refresh. While it is refreshing, the other thing let's discuss. I was mentioning that we have to use the service endpoint and the Azure the SAS key, right, in order to post the message with a custom way. And at the same time, the challenges is where do we store, because your topic name or maybe the service namespace may not be same for every environment. It may be a different one. So for that reason, I was trying with one of the preview features recently released by Microsoft, which is um, the Azure keyword integration with the environment variable. So I have already configured that as well. So let me quickly show you that in order to run the demo scenario 3. So before I go to there, let me see if this has been disabled or not. Yeah, so this has been disabled now. And let me enable the second scenario. Right. So let's look into the Azure keywords, integration with Dataverse. The reason for that, maybe you can create your own custom entity with a config pair value. You can store the endpoint details, or you can store in a way that you could easily change in your target, or you can use the environment variable directly, which is of type string, and you store as a string, and in the target you update it. But I thought let's give a try with this, and let's see how this also works. Okay, so already I created the required things, and in order to use the Azure means in order to use the Key Vault integration with Azure Service Bus, first of all, we need to activate a resource in the subscription level. So if we go into subscription, I've already enabled it, but I'll quickly show you that. So it was under resource provider. See here, Microsoft Power Platform. If your environment is a new one, then by default it will be in a not registered state, and you search for the Microsoft Power Platform and select that and click register. That will register the Power Platform for your Azure subscription. And once your Power Platform is activated, the next is you can create a key vault. So already I have a key vault now. We have to give access to the user who is going to create the environment variable of type secret. That user should have access to this key vault to read, the details. Okay, so in order to do that, we have to add the user in the access control. But before that, we have to allow the service principal, the Dataverse service principal to access this key vault. So that can be done from the access policies. Microsoft has released a documentation as well. I'll share the link which has all the steps. I'll just quickly show you, and I'll not go in detail. But it's very simple. You just click add access policy here, then go to service principal and search for Dataverse. And once it is selected, you add that as a service principal to here. And once your service principal is added in the key vault, the next thing is the access control. In the access control, the user who is going to create the environment variable to reference to this Azure Key Vault, that user details can be added as a role assignment. You can just add as a reader. You do not have to be an admin. So to do that, you just click add role assignment. And if it needs a reader access on the Key Vault reader, so do this and review, click next, and then select the members. Any member is available, select that, and finally do next. Okay, as I'm using my user, so I have already access. Right, so the key vault can be set up in this way. But what is next? After the key vault, we are going to store the service endpoint details in a secret. So in the secret, already I've created two secrets, one for dev, one for test. So I have a dev account SASKey secret. And in this secret, if I'll just quickly show you the value, this is the endpoint details. Yeah, this is the whole endpoint details of the service endpoint, which I'm going to use in the third scenario. So Dataverse is going to connect to this key vault. It read these endpoint details, then it use in the plugin. Similarly, I set up the other one, which has a test service endpoint details. So let's look into the code now. So this time the example 2. It is a simple Dataverse plugin which is going to be registered on the update of the account. We'll take the same example, maybe the same criteria. Let's say when the any account has a website, then let's post the message. But instead of sending the whole context as a big JSON, we are going to send a customized message which can be easily consumed by the listener. Okay, so let's go to the code. So what it is doing is up to this, it checks again the same thing. It checks if it has a website or not. If it has website, then it basically calls another class file here, service bus manager. And in the service bus manager, so this is the main method. OK, we are basically first of all, we need to read the Azure Key Vault details in order to get the connection details. OK, let me show you the environment variable in the meantime. In the Dataverse, I have a solution and created a environment variable of type secret, and there you can point, you can give your subscription, the key name, and all other details to point to the Azure keyword. Okay, so if you see, this is an environment variable, but that is of type secret. As soon as you select your data type, it asks you the store, which is Azure keyword store. And I have already existing details. So let me do add existing. As soon as we do this, it brings the details, which is the subscription ID, the resource group name, and the key vault name, which was created here, and the secret name. The secret we are going to use is this one. To save this. So this is saved now. So that means this is just a reference to the Azure Key Vault. It doesn't actually store the service endpoint connection string. Rather than it has a reference to the Azure Key Vault. So in the code, there is an action which you can execute the retrieve environment secret value. There is an action, and the parameter you can pass as an environment variable name. Your variable name you can pass, and the variable name is this, and it will return a response with the secret value, environment secret value. Okay, so that is the first function I'm calling here, which is making that organization request for the action, and it is passing the variable name, which is in our case the logical name of the variable, which is pl account q SaaS key secret, and it is executing that request, and which is going to return the secret value. And once we have the secret value, we would have all the details. We will have endpoint key, the SaaS key name, the actual key, and what is the queue name or topic name, whatever has been registered. So we'll get all the details. And once we have all the details, we have to uh, prepare this endpoint URL, which is of type HTTPS, and it takes the endpoint um, and the entity path, which is the name of the queue, and it appends the messages at the end. And the next thing is we have to pass the SaaS key token as a barrier token. So for that, I have written a function here, get SaaS token, which use the encryption of the cryptographic encryption, and it gets the base 64 and create a signature out of it. And finally, this it returns the token. And once we have the token, all we have to do is make a HTTP call. Make a HTTP call, set the authorization SaaS token, and post the message. But how to post the message? This is the post async. But as I said, we are not going to send the whole context. Instead, we are going to send a custom JSON. So for that, we prepared a custom JSON here. And before that, we are composing that message. In this case, let's assume we are just going to send the account name and website in the payload instead of sending the whole XML. So I'm passing the required details. You can pass the whole execution entity, the target entity from the execution context, and prepare your JSON string. So in this method, if you'll see, this is a custom entity model been defined, and I'm just setting name and website, and finally serializing to a JSON string and posting into this endpoint, the endpoint URL. Okay, so this is the plugin code. Let's see this in action, how this is working in Database. So I've already registered this plugin, and this time there is no kind of a unsecure configuration because this is not using the service endpoint. And and the other thing is exactly same. It has update on account update is going to trigger, and it is a filter attribute name. And in the image, again, we are checking for the website URL. Right. So let me go to Dataverse and initiate that process. Sorry, my window. Yeah. Right. Let's pick another account and make an update. Okay, we'll pick this one, not a problem. Eight. Let's look into the queue as well. So we have Azure Service Bus queues. Yeah, it's already appeared now. So let's look into the messages. Receive. Yes. This time, this JSON is very simple and say it has only name and it is website. And yeah, basically for the consumer who is going to read the message, it becomes very easy. Yeah, they can easily parse this JSON string and process the message. So that was my third scenario. I think I'm running out of time. Let's quickly show the automation of the Azure Service Endpoint update. So going back to the slide. Right. The people who are from Dataverse, they already might be aware of the challenges that why do we need to make the update? Because even if the service endpoint is a solution ever, when you import the solution into your target, it doesn't export the SaaS key. That means, first of all, your SaaS key would be empty in your target. And the secondly, as well, that your name of the queue or topic, the contract name can be different, even if you have multiple tenant or etc. So there could be a different namespace. So you need to update the details after the solution get imported, right? So how we are going to do this? Either, so as of now, the plugin registration tool is available. You go to the tool again, update manually. You not connect to your target instance, then you update the connection string with the SaaS key, or you write some any other custom code or scripting to update it. But if we have to do a automation with Azure DevOps, so currently there was no kind of extension available for that. And I used to do this using PowerShell. And just recently this week, I packaged this off and published a Power Platform release extension, which can be it is free and available in the marketplace that you can use and inject into your pipeline, that after your solution import you can add that task in order to update the endpoint in your target. So let me quickly show you that as well. First of all, about that extension, let me browse to that. No, it is not browsing here. Let me drag this screen here. Yeah. You see, this is the extension I published this week, and it has only a single task at the moment, update service endpoint. And it has given all the documentation with self-explanatory, but still I'm happy to help if people are going to use and give their feedbacks. And if they want to see any more kind of a task in this extension, I'm happy to add them. But for specific to this one, it takes a database URL, client ID and secret. Then you can pass. There are use of Azure Key Vault. Again, I've given that a preview feature. If by default the option would be false, that means you can pass your service endpoint for which you want to update as a raw string, or you can store in a pipeline variable and pass from there. In the format, everything is given here. And the second option, which is still in the preview, the same concept, because still there are some security concern. Still, I'm not satisfied yet. It's to use. But I've already added in this extension in future. If we are going to store maybe the key vault, sorry, the service endpoint in the key vault. So still we have an option here, and where you select this use of Azure Key Vault, and instead of passing the key vault directly, you can pass the environment variable name. So let me show you the pipeline. I'll show you the release pipeline already I executed. So if you see there is a client ID and the secret for the database environment. and the URL, in my case it is a test, and the service endpoint config, this is used for the preview features, and this is the one where we are passing the directly the connection string. And if you have the details defined here, all you have to do is go to a pipeline, and I'll show in the edit mode. So this is the task. So all you do is pass your database URL, client ID, client secret, and either you pass the details directly here, and it supports for multiple service endpoint. You give the GUID of the service endpoint and their respective connection string, or you give a pipeline variable, and it has given a format as well. It suggests, and when you select this yes, it change this and give the other format as well that pass the environment variable. So I'll quickly show you the existing run which I did this morning, just to show you how it has updated. So you can inject always after your solution import, and this is going to install a module, and finally it will connect to the database, and it will process the configuration records and update the endpoint details, and it will connect to your and the test version of your queues or production version of your queues, so that you do not have to do that manually. That's all I wanted to share. Is there any questions in the chat?
Thank you once again, Satya. So there are a few questions. One of the questions is back Auckland is asking, you mentioned that the Azure Aware plugin, is there any particular aspects of the plugin that makes it Azure Aware? Is it just simply calling the service endpoint, execute to post the message to the Azure Service Bus?
That's correct. I think it's the bit of difference in the terminology. I personally prefer to call it as a service endpoint error, but still it is a Azure error even if we write a custom plugin, because we are still using that service endpoint GUID in order to post the message. And in the plugin class, if you have seen, we instantiate the interface of that service in order to post. So for that, I call it that as a custom Azure error plugin. So I think it is just a terminology.
Fair enough. Phil Cole's asking how you manage to maintain the order of events using Azure Service Bus, especially if Dynamics 365 updated. He's found that the async service does not guarantee events are posted to the Azure Service Bus in the same order, and that the remote execution context operation created on has a maximum precision of 1 second. So rapid updates to a record are not sent to the Azure Service Bus in the same order.
Yeah, means I have not maybe faced that. It is possible that if there is a problem with your either connection or the problem with yeah, so if there is any kind of problem, and if there is a system job created and piling on the queue, it is not been succeeded. Yes, there is no guarantee that which one would get succeed first, because it is a asynchronous service. Anyone can go, I mean, the asynchronous service is going to pick whatever is available, and it can process any message first, right? So I think it is the design aspects to making sure there should not be any dependencies between message to message. But if there is, basically we need to take care some aspect that we do not override one message with the other message, so that challenge is always there.
And finally, the last question is when you pass the plugin context as the JSON file is too large, how would you consume or parse it?
Yeah, so for that reason I was demonstrating that scenario 3, that it is a big JSON or XML which is hard to pass. When we post that using the service endpoint object, we just pass that as an object, we don't have any problem, but it's the problem for the consumer to process it, because as the person said, it is a big JSON. There is a difficulties. So for that reason, I was demonstrating the scenario third. If you have a third party a consumer who is having difficulties in order to process that complex JSON message, you can create that custom plugin and post the custom payload.
Well, thank you, Satya. You've covered a lot of content there. You've gone very much into detail, and you're very hands-on. So I just want to thank you once again. Your sessions are always very, very, very well received, and I think a lot of people benefit from it, especially developers who haven't really known how to solve this, problem in the past. Is definitely some good experience. Thanks for sharing your solution on the marketplace as well. Satya, before you end, please share the link to your solution as well as your contact details in the chat so that the community can follow up with you.
Absolutely. It was a really pleasure again talking here, and thanks to all the participants also uh, for attending. Thanks everyone.
Thank you once again, Satya. Always a pleasure to have Satya. So thank you once again, Satya. So on to our next session.